Now, Americans go to the polls today in an election that is seen as make or break for the world's largest economy. Now, it's a test for democracy because the incumbent, President Donald Trump, has said that there may be vote rigging, especially with mail-in ballots to oust him from power. A Democrat challenger, Joe Biden, is currently the popular candidate in the polls, and this election has highlighted the deep rifts in American social structure. So to discuss this, we're joined by Brooks Spector, who is the associate editor at Daily Maverick and a retired American diplomat. Thanks for your time and welcome to Morning Live, Brooks.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
So before we get into any more detail of the actual voting, what does this election mean for South Africa, given both scenarios, whether Donald Trump or Joe Biden wins?
Well, I think there are a couple of things that we really do need to keep in mind. One is simply that there will be more, if Joe Biden were to win, there will be more, I presume, positive attention directed at Africa, and South Africa, being one of the leading countries on the continent, obviously is part of that. There'll be more attention paid to things like improving trade opportunities, especially under the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which is U.S. law, which allows duty-free access to the United States from Africa of products. There will probably be much more attention paid to efforts to improve and enhance democratic practice on the continent and the various countries. And I think also there will just be a more positive international climate toward multilateral international organizations. A Joe Biden administration would certainly return the United States effectively to the Paris Paris Climate Accord, this is still early for me, Climate Accord. Will attempt to reintegrate with the six-power agreement with Iran over its nuclear potential, would make a return toward the World Health Organization to deal with the threat that's affecting the entire world, that is COVID, among others. And you will see more attention toward building multilateral relationships rather than the more strident go-it-alone prospect that a second Trump administration would give us. That betrays a certain bias, I'm sure, but the point is clear. Africa would figure more specifically on the Biden agenda than it has over the last 4 years.
What does it say, though, for two septuagenarians to be running for this post of arguably the most powerful person in the world?
Well, one thing it does say is that people live longer and obviously continue to have fruitful lives. As somebody who's in his 70s, I applaud that. But it does speak to the fact that if you are of such an age and if you are in charge of as president, then you really need to build a strong, vigorous, active, knowledgeable team around you, full of people who are both experienced but have the energy to do the work that's necessary. The Trump administration so far, as you've seen over the last number of years, has been a study in, the word chaos is a little strong, but certainly a study in constant uncertainty as to who is going to be in a position or who is going to replace him or her. And I would assume that a Biden administration would be drawing on experienced talent that would have been in the Obama administration, because Joe Biden obviously was vice president then, and perhaps even dipping back to the Clinton administration for some people. That's a deep talent pool, and it means that the president doesn't have to do everything. The president has to be able to delegate. One of the more famous aphorisms that came from Harry Truman, who was president in the 1940s and early 50s, he said, look, being president is difficult. Only the tough things, only the complex things, only the difficult things get to me. Everything else gets decided and solved by people down below. And that's true then, it's true now. But what it does mean is that the person who is at the top has to have a good, solid sense of the politics of doing these things rather than simply what might please the crowd at any given moment.
Now, Brooks, looking at this particular election, it is clear that, the stakes are very high, almost 100 million early votes already cast. And there are so many questions that arise here, given some of the reports that we're following about some of the postal votes, for example. And the questions are, will everyone who wants to vote in this election be able to vote one? And will every ballot actually be counted?
Well, the laws in the various states, because of this election, like all presidential elections, is carried out by individual states. There's no national body that does this like South Africa has with the Independent Electoral Commission. Each state handles the election. The laws in every state are that you count every legitimate ballot that is cast. And in those same states, if a ballot is postmarked by election day and it arrives within the next 2, 3, 4 days, depending on the state, it has to be counted, regardless of what the president may or may not wish or desire. What it does mean is that we should prepare ourselves for the idea that there are going to be some significant legal challenges, largely from the Republican Party, but not perhaps only, for votes that are either counted but are not absolutely clear as to whether they were legitimately cast, that is, are the signatures correct or whatever. And even for the possibility we may find some small numbers of ballots that have been forgotten about in some post office somewhere, and that's going to be a problem as well. But the claim by Donald Trump the other day that the election should end on election evening with a president declared and a victor decided is simply not true. It's never been that way. All elections are only official once the results have been certified by the individual states and once the electoral vote totals are sent to the Congress at the beginning of December, and then the House of Representatives officially accepts them. That's how the process is set out in law and constitutional practice. And so all the huffing and puffing about sending in people to check that they're not stuffing the ballot boxes and whatever, this is just a bunch of nonsense. But it's going to have an effect on crowds, and that is the problem to watch out for, obviously.
And then going back to 2016, Brooks, Hillary Clinton obviously won the popular vote, and she obviously lost the Electoral College, and Donald Trump became president. So let's look at those battleground states and perhaps just walk through just a quick explanation of what exactly they are and how the Electoral College actually works.
Okay. I mean, it sounds complicated and arcane, like some sort of medieval process, but what it simply means is that because the election is run state by state by state, the population weight of each individual state says that you have a certain electoral vote number. California, being the most populous state, has 55. New Hampshire, small state population, has only 4, and so forth through the other states. Now, the quirk in this is if you win California theoretically by just one vote, you get all of its electoral weight. So you now have 55 electoral votes. You need 270 because there are a total of 538 by the simple math. So 270 is 1/2 plus 1. Now, what happens is you have states where the support between Republicans and Democrats seems to be almost evenly divided, or in which the allegiance of people in that state has swung between the two parties over time. And so, at least at the very beginning of the count, that is when on the East Coast, when people start voting physically on Election Day, which is just about now in the U.S. and in a couple of states. In one little state, the whole town gets together, they vote, they have a cup of coffee and a donut, and then they all go home. But in most cases, people have been voting, as you say, 100 million or so by advance or absentee or mail-in ballots. And then the remainder of voters, presumably perhaps as many as 60 million, will line up at the various polling stations. So a state like Florida, which is a large, complex state, demographics are complicated, has 29 electoral votes, which puts it in a fairly elite category of large states. But it's been conflicted between Democrats and Republicans. And we can expect that vote in Florida will be very carefully watched. Also, curiously, Georgia and North Carolina have historically, over the last generation, been Republican, but the demographics of the two states, are beginning to change. And so, therefore, are the attitudes and allegiances of people. So you add in Pennsylvania, which is another large state with big urban areas and a big section at the same time, small towns and rural areas. That's also a swing state. And then going further to the west, you have places like Ohio, which has been reliably Republican, but which may be changing, Michigan and Wisconsin, which Donald Trump won, but had traditionally been Democratic. And then you move further to the west, you come into places like Iowa, mostly farms, small cities, but often an old-style progressive tendency, and so has been Democratic in the past, maybe again. And then Colorado, now more likely Democratic, and then finally Arizona. We think of Arizona as the Wild West, but actually there are more people living in urban areas in Arizona than in some older, more settled states. And there is also now a significant demographic there of African Americans and obviously Hispanic Americans, mostly Mexican Americans. And those are contested votes, the Mexican American population, that is. And so those are the swing states that we're likely going to be paying very close attention to. So when I get up tomorrow morning, so my first question is going to be, what's going on in Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania? And that will give me some clues as to what I can tell people going forward about what it looks like.
Well, looking forward to have that conversation with you. Thanks so much, Brooks Spector, Associate Editor at the Daily Maverick and retired American diplomat, helping us understand the United States presidential election, which takes place today. And it's a race between incumbent Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And this is seen as America's most divisive election yet. And